we associate our humanity with brokenness. And I'm like, we were human before brokenness entered the picture. And so sometimes being human means I'm going to hit it out of the ballpark. I'm going to make a presentation and it's going to really move people because I did a good job and the Holy Spirit was at work. Like I handled my part well. And so all of that, it does come back to our mindset is to be human doesn't just mean to be flawed.
Welcome to It's Not About the Money, a podcast in search of grounded fundraising. I'm Heather, and together with my co-host Andy, we look beyond the quick tips and formulas. Join us as we explore the nuance and complexity of ministry fundraising. If you want to thrive in partner development, not just survive it, this is the place for you. What if exhaustion, creeping bitterness, and stagnant personal skills in cross-cultural workers were replaced with refreshment, contentment, and growth? This can be your reality. Life on the field is stressful, and too often cross-cultural workers are under-resourced for the realities that they face. Global Trellis helps cross-cultural workers flourish through ongoing equipping and development. You need a place for your soul to breathe, your head to be engaged, and your heart to stay tender.
Thanks, Heather. These words were taken directly from the Global Trellis website, and we share them with you today because they capture the heart and passion of today's guest, Amy Young. Global Trellis is focused primarily on missionaries serving abroad, but the concepts we'll discuss today will certainly apply to ministry workers serving in any field, foreign or domestic. Heather, would you tell us a little more about Amy?
It would be my privilege. So today we are hosting the lovely Amy Young on our show. She is the founder of Global Trellis as well as the co-founder of Velvet Ashes. Both of these spaces push into the care, equipping, and formation of ministry workers. She is also the author of several books, which we will link in our show notes. And Amy spent just shy of 2 decades in overseas support-based work before returning to the States and continuing in domestic ministry. Amy, what else do we need to know about you as we enter into this conversation?
Mostly you need to know I love to have fun. So I can't wait for this conversation.
Oh, yeah, good. Good.
She's bringing the fun.
Bringing the fun. Okay, so I guess to get us started, could you share with us a little of your own story, how you entered into support-based ministry, and what your fundraising experience was like?
I would love to. It's a little shocking to me. I've been on full-time support. I'm still on full-time support since 1995.
Wow.
And probably, I know. And probably like many of you listening to this, you thought you might be fundraising for a certain amount of time. I thought I was fundraising for 2 years. So it didn't feel overwhelming or I thought it's only 2 years. I can do this.
Yeah. The
Lord was gracious to not say, this is going to be your new path to finances.
Forever.
Forever and ever. So that is just kind of how I got into it. Was I went with an organization and ironically, they were asking for a 1-year commitment, but God had asked me to make a 2-year commitment. So I made a 2-year commitment, which was surprising. When my mom found out it was technically a 1-year commitment, she's like, I did not know that. I'm like, well, because God asked me to make a 2-year commitment. And so I was raising funds as a young single person without a lot of other obligations. And I would just say, again, when you think it's 2 years and you're young and you don't really think bad things are going to happen to you, like the Lord's
you're
called
indestructible.
You to this.
When you're
for
young.
2 things. One, you think you're doing the Lord's work because you are. And 2, you're young and kind of foolish.
Yeah.
So the irony is in my 2nd year, I almost died.
Oh my goodness.
I know. It didn't mean, I wish everyone listening to this could have just seen, we're on Zoom as we're recording this so we can see each other, Heather and Andy's face. They were like, whoa, didn't see that coming. Yeah, neither did I.
Yeah.
Neither did I. So long story short, I got bacterial meningitis, went into a coma, and my parents got a call at 1:30 in the morning. Basically, my teammate's dad was a doctor. And so as she kind of described over the phone my symptoms, he said, this is not good. This is actually really bad. And I feel morally obligated to call Amy's parents because I'm pretty sure she has bacterial meningitis and she's going to die.
Wow.
And I just feel her parents should know this. So unbeknownst to my parents, they get a call at 1:30 from my teammate's dad, goes through all of this. And really that the next phone call will be that Amy has died.
Good grief.
Well, hello, I'm talking to you. So I did not die.
Yeah.
Praise
I
the
lived.
Lord.
Thanks. Praise God. But I did have a long recovery in front of me, and I needed to be, they were trying to decide whether to medevac me out of my country of service to an area with better
Medical
hospitals.
care. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was, I think that at the time, the price tag was $40,000.
Oh.
And I had not paid $200 for medical evacuation insurance. Because I was young, and I'm like, I'm not going to need this. And so my parents did assure me, had I actually needed to be medically evac, they would have come up with the money. But they did at the appropriate time say, honey, why didn't you get the medical evacuation?
Yeah.
And I can remember sitting in my training. We were doing training in California, going over all of the things, and it just coming off a season of fundraising, it just felt like $200 more. I just didn't want to do it.
Oh,
and
man.
so I was like, well, and again, as I said, I was in my 20s. It didn't occur to me that actual medical things
can happen
to anyone and not just to certain quote unquote older people.
Yeah, man, that just brings to mind. So we have an upcoming episode on like a scarcity mindset, and that just really triggers that for me. Man,
good point.
Yeah, that's the kind of decision you make from a scarcity mindset. Thinking that $200 is kind of
going to break the bank,
right?
Yeah, scarcity and ignorance. So I just want to encourage everyone.
Yeah. Follow the recommendations of your sending org.
Follow the recommendations of your sending organization.
Well, I just love that you decided to go for 2 years, even though the commitment was formally for 1, because I feel like it's just so hard to really get a full feel for a place, even in 1 year.
Yes.
There's just so much that you learn and you just change and you figure out how to do things and you become more fluent, even just culturally. It makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, that was certainly a fun start to the conversation. I feel like we've learned so much.
So given your experiences and your areas of competence, there really, I think, were so many directions we could have taken this conversation. But we've decided to talk through what it looks like to honor your humanity in fundraising. So in landing on this focus in our time today, you mentioned that Global Trellis recently conducted a survey. So I'd like to talk about that. Could you share more about that with us and how it led to this topic today?
I am so excited to get to talk to this because it's one of those things where you're asked to do one simple thing and you're like, sure, that sounds like fun. And God absolutely opens the doors and has so much more for you there.
Oh, man. Yeah.
So this is surprising to me. I would not have guessed 4 months ago that this is what we would be talking about. Last fall, I was asked to speak at a conference in February, and they presented me several different topics. One of which was, hey, what are 4 things that cross-cultural workers are dealing with that they are not telling their senders? And I thought, oh, well, that sounds like a very interesting topic. And I actually love to do surveys. I do surveys all the time of cross-cultural workers. I work with enough that I do feel I have my finger on the pulse and I have a good read, but I also think there's a lot, you only see what you see. And so by doing a survey, you get to hear from a broader perspective. So I did this anonymous survey in January and people knew this survey is anonymous. The results are going to be used for a workshop in February that I'm presenting, talking about what are things that you are dealing with that you are not telling senders. And I think because it was anonymous and they knew it was going to be used, it wasn't just like, oh, data for the sake of, like, let's just gather more information that we do nothing with.
Right.
So 358 people took the survey, which kind of, well, it blew me away because I closed the survey the end of January and had to have a meaningful workshop put together by February 23rd.
Wow.
So I was like, that is a lot of results. So I got a small committee. There were 2 other people that worked with me basically that whole month going through the results of the data. So that is kind of how this all came about. And even this whole topic of humanity, what came out in that survey was eye-opening. It was affirming. It was also sobering. And it really has helped me and others to now name kind of, I think, how because one of the questions I was curious about is how did we get here to a gap between the senders and the goers? Knowing both sides are very well intentioned. We're all for Christ's work in the world. We're all for being the hands and feet of Jesus. We're all for meeting suffering and offering true hope and freedom all around the world. And yet a gap does exist, often between senders and goers, and trying to figure out, why does that gap exist? And a long story short, well, and briefly, let me just say, out of the 358, we only ask a couple of demographic questions to truly maintain people's anonymity.
Sure.
Right.
Really, the only data we gathered is, are you on the field? Are you in a home office or working in member care, or are you other?
Okay.
Basically, 80% were on the field, which
so all
gave
over
us
the world.
all over the world,
Yeah.
all over the world on the field. And about 15% are working in an organization. And then about 5% picked other. So I'm guessing, who knows why, but just, I think once you've been a cross-cultural worker, these are your people, and you want to take the surveys and you want to share your insight.
Yeah.
Which was very helpful to us to go, this is accurate data. This isn't 80% people in home offices guessing. This was 80% of people on the field answering right then. So this survey was in January of 2024. And it was really powerful then to be able to present it and even to talk to you now to say, this isn't a survey from 2 years ago, 5 years ago, pre-pandemic, 10 years ago. This is right now, currently, what is going on.
That's great. And they had a stake in this too.
And they had a stake in this because they knew this was going to be shared. And it was a way for them to communicate with senders anonymously so they could share what's really going on.
Right.
So I think that was really powerful.
Yeah, great.
Right. I'm so curious.
I know, right?
I know. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
so
in a nutshell,
tell us.
so then we did say, do you think you have something that might jeopardize you being on the field if your supporters knew? And 52% said, yes, we do.
Wow.
And so then our follow-up question was, what is your this? If they knew this, and I'm putting this in air quotes, what is your this?
Yeah.
And that was where just the depth and the breadth of the answers went, because it wasn't just like one this. And that also was slightly the challenge of sorting out the data. Some people would maybe write one or two things, and some people would write 3 long paragraphs, which was touching of how much time people put in. But in essence, we found about 11 different thises, and in no particular order.
Okay.
Politics, physical health, emotional and mental health, sex and sexuality, things related to faith and theology, marriage, things related to their organization, things related to their kids, debt and finances, singleness, and then we just had a category called miscellaneous, because there were quite a few things where 2 or 3 people said it, but not enough to put like a whole category.
Sure.
What was stunning, though, there was not one thing that only one person said.
It was all shared.
So, yes. And so just that, if you think, people listening to this, if you think you're going through something and you might be the only one, you are not. And things that were so specific, it was stunning. Somebody else also said that. So that was kind of the thises that came out. So as we looked at that whole list, what was interesting is almost everything is related to being human. My politics, my view on politics, or your view on politics, or my supporters' view on politics, physical health, emotional health, almost nothing did they say was related to the work they are doing. A few people did. A few people said things like, the truth is my ministry is failing. And I'm and to a certain extent, like I inherited a failing ministry, which now if it really does die, how many supporters are going to follow me to another ministry if they think, quote unquote, I killed it when I didn't kill it? So a few people did reference the work that they're doing, but the vast majority, far above 95%, it was referencing their humanity, which really stood out to this subcommittee and me as we went through the results. And that was, again, where we were just asking, how did we get here? Senders are well-intentioned. Goers are well-intentioned. And yet there does feel this pressure that I have to hide or downplay part of my life, part of my humanity. And to try to give language to what we were seeing, we referenced the ministry pedestal. I'm sure you all have heard about the pedestal and the
Yeah.
ministry pedestal.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, I think on this show, we've called it the myth of the missionary hero.
Yeah.
Exactly the same idea.
Yeah.
And so we said, well, the thing is, a pedestal, if you have a pedestal standing in front of you, there's a left side and a right side, which we wanted to be able to visualize what's going on the sender side that's kind of pushing people up on the pedestal, and what's going on the goer side that's kind of pushing people up on the pedestal. And really, what we landed on is on the sender side, they will say things like, I couldn't do what you're doing. What you're doing is so hard.
Sure.
You're my hero for doing what you're doing. And so what we believe, they're trying to honor the sacrifice.
Yeah.
And just the challenges many people in ministry are facing. But it comes out sideways. If you hear often enough, I couldn't do what you're doing, you're basically superhuman.
Yes.
You're a hero.
Right.
Then on the goer side, now switching to the goer side, well, if people keep calling you a hero, you feel a pressure to live up to that expectation. If people keep talking about that you're superhuman, it indirectly reinforces that you need to be superhuman, which then downplays your humanity. So as I was talking to a friend of mine who's a Christian, but she's never served overseas about this, she absolutely resonated. She was like, oh my goodness, okay, cross-cultural workers are just like me. They are human. I was glad that she was resonating with the humanity. She's like, yeah, I worry about my kids' mental health too. I feel the pressure of finances.
Yeah.
But something in me recoiled. And I'm like, they're not just like you. You don't get it. If your kid is really struggling with emotional health to the point that you feel you need to move, like that you cannot get help where you are, you're going to lose your home. You're going to have to move away from your home, your community, your job. If you have to relocate back to your passport country, can you even find housing? Can you get a job? All of this. We're like, the stakes are so different.
Same struggles, different environment.
Same struggles, different environment. So we landed on this. What seems to be pushing on the humanity is that we are humans, but that the stakes can be higher when you're on the field. And so on the sender side, to understand the stakes, what is at stake for a cross-cultural worker when part of their humanity does come into play. And on the goer side, for them to realize, yes, the stakes are very high, but we don't want the stakes to be in the driver's seat. We want your humanity to be as equally involved in the discussion as the stakes. The stakes shouldn't be higher than your humanity. They both need to be at play in the discussion. So that's some of what we were coming about, which is why then when you guys wondered what I'd like to talk about related to fundraising and support raising, I really would love to help all of us continue to lean into this conversation. What does it mean to be human, to have human needs, and then the financial side that goes with that? So that's just what drew me to this conversation.
Yeah. We always talk about how fundraising is part of your formation and your humanity is a big part of that.
That's good. And I think what stood out to me was that all these ideas were shared. Nobody was coming up with like their own things. And I think the enemy really thrives when we're in isolation and we think that it's just our problem. And we compare ourselves to everybody else that we're witnessing from the outside, maybe other missionaries even. And we say, look how fast they got funded or whatever it is. But we don't see what they had to go through and their unique dynamics, and that the Lord maybe took them through a very formative season as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think in general, I've only ever been part of the American church to a great extent. So I'll just speak about the American church. But I think there's just so much room for the church to have more capacity and tolerance for the messy that happens in people's lives. Because I feel like there very much is a need. I mean, even in the States, a need to present in a certain way, to present as though you have it together.
Yeah. Your Instagram self.
Yeah. Or even just, the cultural things around, well, we don't talk about those things and that's not for polite society, whatever. There's all sorts of formation over time that has left us here, right? how much more for people, like you said, that are, it's not just a reflection on how people view them to show up messy, but it's a reflection on their livelihood, or people could make different choices about investing in their messy, right? And so that just feels like, I don't know, something that's...
It is significant to think like half of the people, right? At least half of the people said, if people knew about this area of my life, they would cut. They would bail on me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also wonder, again, kind of thinking about the formation that has happened in our culture specifically, I wonder how much the kind of like individualist consumer mentality has played into that, right? I mean, it's just kind of understood that when you don't get, I don't know, if a product is different than you want, you return it, or if a product isn't what you paid for, or there's very much a correlation between the money you're willing to spend and the outcome you're willing to receive from that spending, your return on investment. And so I can see why people would think, oh goodness, if I show the kinks or whatever, are people going to continue investing?
And in a world with social influencers, it's very natural for us to ask the question, how am I marketing myself as I'm approaching my donors?
Yeah.
And that's tricky. Like, what do we do with that? Because in one sense, we do want to be thoughtful about how we approach our donors. Like, how do we do that in a way that honors them, that shows them, hey, I've prepared and I put thought into this, but I'm also being myself. I'm also being authentic. That doesn't feel natural to me.
And what some people on the survey said, also just sometimes balancing the tension between different supporters. So for example, people on the idea of faith and theology and sex and sexuality, saying, I might have some churches that are very LGBTQ affirming.
Interesting.
And some sending churches that are very not more traditional marriage. And so having to navigate to some supporters, having to not present in such, but knowing certain things are going to be very, very important to them.
Yeah.
And in other contexts, other things are going to be very, very important. And trying to say, I just want to share what is happening in my ministry with you. I realize this church is going to have certain theology. Church B is going to have certain theology. But I'm here as a cross-cultural worker being sent by you to share about my ministry and not to get into some of the political or theological conversations that are important to have, but that's not what I'm doing. I'm doing this other work. Yeah. One of the questions it raised for me looking at all of the data from the survey is, how can we be people of conviction, but also connection? So my takeaway wasn't suddenly you have no convictions on a theological point or a political point. So for example, at the time that we're recording this, the war between Israel and Gaza and then Ukraine and Russia are going on, and different elections around the world. And knowing that they may be more supportive of one side than the other in a war, and other supporters may be very different. So my takeaway isn't, well, don't have any convictions. Like, don't be pro whatever, pro Gaza, pro Israel, pro Ukraine. It's not to have no convictions, but I'm just curious how we can all be people of convictions and yet not just then be in our little camps,
right?
But to truly be then working together and serving together. So that's just something I personally have just been mulling over, how we can do that better.
Yeah, because that's the stuff that really, I think, doesn't appeal to a lot of us when we think about politics, like the flip-flopping and the pandering to your constituents and that sort of thing. That's just really like sours us, I think. Yeah.
But I know from the survey, some people have very strong feelings, in particular about the war between Gaza and Israel, and sensing their supporters would have very, very different feelings. And so how to not let that become divisive.
Yeah.
And as I say, that we can all have convictions. I don't think that's wrong, but to not die on the hill of our conviction.
Sure.
And one person had said something to the effect of, you know what? Not being scared to cultivate, quote unquote, the right kind of supporter. That maybe not everyone is going to be the best partner for you. And if you're finding you're really having to bend over backwards for one or two people or groups, trust that the Lord again, we talked a little bit earlier about scarcity mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Trust that if they end up deciding not to partner with you, that will be okay. The Lord will provide you with other partners who understand the vision and mission that you are doing and are excited to support you, and that you don't have to totally hide or downplay parts of yourself to contort yourself into the box of what they want you to be.
Sure.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But to find partners that are for you.
Yeah, it feels like maybe even if there isn't necessarily agreement, there's alignment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In part for me also, as I've been thinking about embracing your humanity and fundraising, to factor in, maybe we need to put a personal growth budget line in our fundraising. So be that books that you want to, you say, hey, I'd like to read 3 new books a year. So building that into fundraising, building in meeting with a spiritual director or a coach, saying, hey, if I'm coming up on a big transition, I would like to budget for 6 sessions with a coach. Or I would like to, I am just kind of curious about some theology things. I'm not changing my belief in Jesus, but I'm wondering a little bit on baptism or the role of women, like just things you might have seen differently because you've lived in a different culture and you served with people from different cultures. And so you're just wanting to process that in a safe place. So finding a spiritual director, being willing to pay for a spiritual director.
Yeah.
Budgeting. I'm sure you've talked about this, but this came up, budgeting for retirement.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Budgeting for things with kids education and vacations, and not saying that I can't take vacations because my supporters would not like that.
Right. Because we have this thriftiness is next to godliness mentality. Yeah.
But saying as humans have needs to have fun. I started at the top of this hour or the top of our podcast with to have fun.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous to think any of us are going to figure everything out by ourselves. So if I am going through a transition, to have a coach who's worked with a lot of people who are in transition, they can help me. One of the things we talk about at Global Trellis is the idea of currency isn't just money. When we define currency only as money, we are thinking way too small. There are lots of currencies. There's relationship, there's time, there's effort, there are finances. So finding the right currency for something. And sometimes the right currency is paying a counselor, a coach,
absolutely,
a spiritual director.
If you think about it, it actually can be a really great stewardship of financial resources and time to position yourself to receive from someone that has to give versus trying to either go on with a limp or try to kind of reinvent the wheel yourself.
And ultimately, the question that I have is, and maybe there's probably a survey out there, but like, why do people leave the field prematurely? I wonder what percentage of them are, well, I just felt the Lord was calling me home, versus funds ran out, or this crisis,
marriage is in trouble, or my mental health is in trouble.
Out, or whatever.
Burned out, yes.
Right. So I think if you had an honest conversation with a donor that is like-minded, it wouldn't be a hard leap to say, I need to budget in not only my professional development, but also my personal growth.
And my family well-being.
Yeah.
All of that. I think so.
Yeah.
And that's why I would love to see it more and more just being a line item on a budget. And so not kind of, I'll say hidden in the budget, sprinkled in, like, oh, well, I'll take a little here, or I didn't quite spend all of this, so I can use that to buy books. To say, no, I have a line of professional development, personal development, and it includes meeting with someone, books, maybe taking a course.
That's great.
All of that. And then so depending on the year, depending on your need, you will use that money differently.
That's really hard because, I mean, at least the people that I work with, not all of them, but a lot of them will look at an initial budget and say, what can I take out? How can I, before I've gotten in the car to drive it, I want to start taking out the power windows and the steering. I can get by on less, which is, again, to that scarcity mentality. Why are you hamstringing? Why are you putting more obstacles there in front of you that you don't need? Because, like, what's the reason behind that?
Because it feels daunting.
It does.
Yeah. I mean, it legitimately feels daunting until we can really start to reframe and see and kind of think of God's massiveness in light of this budget that we're looking at. And, I think that's why it's really such a gift to have God's word and the stories of his provision for his people over time to see like, oh, it's no new thing for him to provide in really unique, creative ways, even when a task seems daunting.
Yeah. And just to pull on one thread that you said, one of the areas of guilt, maybe, I don't know a better way to say that, of humanity was the debt and the finances. Like they didn't want to tell their donors about that. And that just seems like a perpetuating cycle. Like you can't tell them about it and they're not, so you can't raise the funds to cover that. That's tough.
Quite a few people, well, more than just a few is what I'm trying to say. Not loads, but enough referenced having credit card debt because they didn't have enough financial support. And so they then were taking their own ministry expenses. And the main way they were paying for it was with credit cards, which broke my heart. Yeah. Because again, I don't think that's God's heart for anyone on the field to go into massive credit card or personal debt. So that made me sad that they felt that pressure and that was their reality.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm curious whether thinking about this in light of that survey or from your own experience or even people that you've worked with, I would love to hear some examples of what you think it looks like if we fail to honor our humanity in fundraising.
One from the very beginning when I said is reality of being human is something's going to happen. And you don't know in your situation if it is that you're going to have an illness on the field, that you're going to be in a car accident. Suddenly, you ate something and your tooth broke and you're having to deal with a dental bill that you weren't planning. But being human, something is going to come in. Maybe there's a little pressure on your marriage you hadn't envisioned. Your marriage isn't in trouble. It is not in crisis. But how much better to go, you know what? This is a part of being human. Our marriages are going to have seasons that are quote unquote easier and quote unquote harder. As a single person, loneliness, that you're going to have seasons where you don't really feel that lonely and other seasons that you feel very lonely. And so to know this is a part of being human is the ebb and flow of life. And when I think the problem for a lot of people is when we don't factor that in. So when you say when we don't factor that into our fundraising, there is no margin then for a medical bill. One medical bill can almost send you over the edge, as opposed to saying, you know what? Humans are going to have medical realities, whether it be our kids, ourselves. Marriages are going to go through ebbs and flows. It does not mean we're doing marriage wrong or we're in a bad marriage or we're in a crisis. You're going to have seasons of loneliness or where you do just need someone outside of your organization to talk through something so that you can be in your organization fully invested. And so just to say, I think when we deny our humanity, we live with too little margin. And so the line between sustainability and true crisis is much more, it's too thin. It's much thinner than the Lord wanted. Even though Global Trellis loves to provide resources and train and support and walk with people, the truth is we cannot 100%, no organization can absolutely crisis prevent or crisis avoid or just mitigate, all of these things related to humanity. The thing is, we can walk with people. We can have equipped people. So when they're going through the valley, it's normalized. So they know this is not a fun valley to walk through, but I'm not a bad person. I'm not a bad cross-cultural worker. I'm not doubting the Lord. This is the valley of the shadow of death, but I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Like we have preloaded the truths of the scripture and resources so that when we go through those valley times or a crisis, we have some resources in place to walk with us. And it might cushion them a little bit, but not to totally avoid them. And I think in that survey, a lot of people, because there isn't the permission to have anxiety or to be depressed, to feel a little overwhelmed with what you're doing, then the answer is just to push harder to hide that, which then leads to burnout. And burnout can lead to true breaking, a true emotional, crumbling, physical break.
Yeah, and you didn't mention this by name, but I'm certain it's there. But addiction, that's how addiction takes such a destructive hold, is by feeling a greater and greater need to hide
Yes.
and diminish.
Hide and diminish, and then even trying to medicate sideways.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a few things that just really blew me away from what you just said. I do think that humanity needs margin. And it's so interesting because, again, our cultural stream is so efficient. There's such a high value on efficiency, optimization. And if only we could just be machines that get the downloads that we need and get the servicing that we need, and we can just run hard,
get the patches.
right? But that's just not how it is.
Yeah.
And it's so what we want to move towards all the time, just kind of getting to this place where set it and forget it. That's not a problem anymore. Don't struggle with that. It's just not the human experience.
It's not reality.
It's not reality.
Yeah.
But it feels like there is such pressure for that, which is heartbreaking.
It is. I will also say, I don't know, I imagine you both are familiar with the Enneagram.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're listening to this,
Yep.
I am a 3. So my love language is efficiency.
Uh-huh.
And yet, even in that, I can see like, that's just one strand of God. I mean, I think that's what I do love about the Enneagram is it shows the whole faceted. And so God loves efficiency, but that's not the only thing he loves.
Right.
And so in our humanity, to say, I think God has really been teaching me efficiency isn't the supreme goal.
Right.
It is not, it's not a bad goal. And if you can find ways to do certain things better, that's not bad. That's good.
Yeah.
Again, being a good steward of resources. But to say, we have all been formed by our cultures. And so to go, I have been formed by efficiency. And so that's not good or bad. Like God, these are God-given gifts of how he has wired me. But to also say, Amy, you are human.
Mm-hmm.
You need to also factor in things related to your humanity. Food, sleep, connection, rest, all of that. And when those are in proper alignment or more proper alignment, when they're given space, actually then efficiency can come out too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the irony.
You have more fuel to work with. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so this is all, maybe some listener is saying this is all well and good if somebody's starting out for the first time and they're building a budget. But how do I approach my donors and say my costs have gone up? How do I re-engage them and like pitch this idea to them?
I would say be honest. And so if you are in fundraising long enough, for example, as I have been in fundraising now almost 30 years. When I started, I would not have known, 27-year-old Amy would not have known the needs of 56-year-old Amy. That's just reality. And so now to be able to share things, if you are on the field and you've got aging parents and you need to now budget at 1 or 2 trips a year home to visit your aging parent.
Yeah.
There's a crisis, a medical crisis with a family member. You've got kids going off to college. I think you just share with them at this stage of life what I'm facing. Maybe you are in your late 20s and early 30s and you're facing infertility, which first of all, if you are, I'm so sorry. But facing infertility on the field is so challenging. And that's where it's hard. You might not want to put all of that out in a newsletter.
Right.
But you find some supporters who you can share that part of your humanity.
Yeah.
And say, hey, we need to make 3 extra trips to this city for fertility treatment. And that's going to cost us $2,800. Yeah. Would you be willing to pay for our transportation?
Yeah.
So I think people
get it.
People get it. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you. You said it so clearly, Andy. People get it. If you just say, I need $2,800, people are going to be like, why? But if it's a specific need, I just recently got a newsletter from an organization and they shared some specific things. And I have to say, because it was specific and it wasn't just, we want $5,000. It was, we want it to do X, Y, Z. And it really moved me. And I'm like, I want to be a part of that. And I could see you're going to have supporters who are like, I want to be a part of helping them have a family.
I love those letters. Yeah.
I want to be a part. of letting that person have as much time with their mom or dad as they can as they're aging.
We got to give
I
them
want
credit.
to be a part. Yes.
Well,
yes.
and, just kind of thinking about a recent conversation we had with Travis Cottrell around the values of authenticity and vulnerability. I really think that vulnerability unlocks connection in a very unique way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, of course, like you said, I think it's appropriate to be discerning in the extent that you're vulnerable, given the relationship and things like that. But I do think that if it feels safe to be vulnerable, it can be a really powerful connector and really allow opportunity for people to meet you in that need. Okay, so I'm curious. Let's say that we were going to add a module to the Provisio curriculum on the topic of your humanity and fundraising. What are different subtopics or emphases that you would want to write into that module?
I would love to kind of brace the whole of humanity, and I would love to help people think a little bit through human development. What are your needs in your 20s? And at that stage, talking about really, if you can do some fundraising, if your organization does things with retirement or not. If you start to think about retirement in your 20s when it's fundraising, it makes such a difference.
Oh, such a difference.
Yeah.
It feels really cruel to talk to 60-year-olds who have not been doing it. Well, yeah, shut up. To find age and stage appropriate. What are age and stage appropriate for in your 30s? Thinking about fundraising. Someone in their early 20s talking about family planning and budgeting for your children's education. That just, again,
college funds. Yeah.
Begin to plant those seeds. But I think it is so helpful if we had some, I do love a good chart so I can visualize something or a timeline. These are things to be thinking about in your 20s when it comes to fundraising. These are things to be thinking about in your 30s when it comes to fundraising. These are things in your 40s or 50s. These are things to be thinking about if you're married. These are things to be thinking about if you're single.
Yeah.
These are things to be thinking about when you have, let's say, 1 to 3 kids. These are things to be thinking about when you got 4 to 6 kids. And just because, again, all of those scenarios are valid, but they're really different. And so to have a little bit of specialized, as a single person, you need to think about retirement differently. You need to think about health insurance differently than a married couple.
Sure.
Because if you are now in the hospital, there isn't someone else to keep working. You are now not able to, quote unquote, work. So all of these things, I would just love to have that and have it not be, again, daunting, but I would love for it to be framed. We are made in the image of God. We are image bearers. God does not find our humanity an imposition. God made us as humans. He loves our humanity.
He came as a human.
Yes. So how then can we overlay that with fundraising and not be like, oh, this is the biggest bummer? No, this is a big opportunity to think about things. And so I would just love for people to not feel. One of the specialists we have at Global Trellis is a financial specialist, because I found so many cross-cultural workers find the financial piece overwhelming, and therefore then they just don't talk about it. And it's actually an area, it feels very heavy because they're not able to talk about it, instead of just saying, look, this is a part of my humanity. We need to talk about finances the way we need to talk about rest, the way we need to talk about grief, the way we need to talk about efficiency. Let's just talk about it.
Yeah, it strikes me that, if we were to have a curriculum on this, which we just might have to do, because I feel like so many of those ideas were so helpful, that there's just so many angles on this. Not only is it your humanity and fundraising, think of very practically the things you're going to come up against as you are a human finding yourself living in support-based ministry, but then also it's just kind of, I don't know if I would say a mantra, but just kind of something to remind yourself of in the fundraising process, especially in those seasons where the formula would require you to kind of operate outside the limits that you have as a human, right? Or maybe not the formula, but just thinking that, there are some seasons where it feels like there's a lot of pressure to get this many calls in and this many meetings and to send this many things. And I think it's so good to operate with clear goals and to move towards those. And some days you just don't feel well, and it's okay if you have to make an adjustment, right? Versus kind of having this exacting attitude towards yourself of like, no, I need to get through this, or I can't stop until I've done this, or I don't know. I mean, Andy, don't you feel like you talk with clients that struggle with knowing their limits and embracing that?
I think there's both sides of that for sure. There's some people that are a little too chill, but absolutely. There's a lot of people that are really high achievers and maybe super high perfectionists as well. And on the responsibility scale, just off the charts. And so those are the people that we'd have to say, Sabbath is divine and it is ordained. So you got to do it. Mm-hmm. You got to operate out of rest and not out of just fatigue and just a sense of duty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love what you said there, Andy, of all of us in our humanity is going to be slightly different. So part of it is self-knowledge, understanding maybe I am a little too chill.
Yeah.
So I need to then factor this in, or maybe I am a little too type A. And so I need to factor this in, that even the, what does it mean to be human is going to vary.
Right.
Guess what?
Yeah.
There's a lot of nuance.
Yeah.
And to say, okay, I know I can be a little too obsessive. If I haven't made my, 27 calls by 9 a.m., I have failed.
Yeah.
And as opposed to someone else like, oh, God's got it. I don't have to do anything. You're like, well, no, there is personal responsibility, but also it is the work of the Spirit. I mean, this is where it is.
Yep. Absolutely.
There are good principles, but it's not exactly formulaic.
Right.
Absolutely.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. So I think what stands out here as we kind of wrap up here, Amy, is that this concept can go both ways. Not only honoring and recognizing our own humanity as a fundraiser, but also honoring the humanity of the people that are partnering with us. So I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts about honoring our donors?
I love that question. I do have thoughts. And I think partially what I'd like to say to everyone listening is go with your personality. What's going to work for one person is not going to be honoring to another. Some of you are going to know like all the birthdays of supporters. If that's how you want to, if that works for you, that's awesome. Others of you, honestly, how I honor the humanity, I connect with people via sports. And
cool.
So when I know it sort of, honestly, it is so funny now. I will see a certain football team and I will think of someone I served with in China. Or when I'm on Sunday watching the NFL, it is actually a great day internally for me of connecting to people. They might not know it, but it reminds me to pray for them. It reminds me to think about them. Oh, that's right. That person, their mom was sick or they're this. So find whatever it's going to work for you to honor their humanity.
Yeah.
I could literally go through almost every NFL team and I have it associated with someone that I have served with, and it reminds me to pray for them. I've got supporters in two big chunks from Colorado and from Kansas. So often in newsletters, I will reference the Kansas Jayhawks and the Denver Broncos to find ways to connect with humanity. So I just want to encourage everyone, whatever's going to work for you. The chances of 98% of you now using the NFL in the United States to connect with your supporters, very slim. But find something that's going to work for you that will help you have an end to their humanity and a connecting point.
That's really good.
That's great.
Yeah. I think another thought that brings up for me is just, there's a lot of kind of assumptions we can make when we are reaching out to people and we don't hear back from them. I think that specifically is such a great opportunity to remember their humanity. There's a phrase that I used to use over and over when I was coaching people more actively, and that was just that, your urgency is not their urgency. So don't be quick to make an assumption about their silence. It could be that their kid broke their arm or that they got the stomach bug or, it could be all kinds of things. And so it just feels like that's another place that inserting this like, oh, they're human. Stuff comes up for them too. I don't need to sweat it. That can be helpful.
I love it. That's great.
I guess that would be my final question. And maybe it's just another way to phrase what you just said, but maybe Amy, help us think through a way to maybe rewrite this mindset or some of these soundtracks that we have going on in our head. If we find ourselves going down this path that says, I'm broken, I'll be exposed, I don't want to disappoint my community. Give us like a true statement to confront that lie that we could be telling ourselves.
The first thing that popped into my mind, Andy, was the idea of breath prayers. And that idea of praying like, Lord, help me believe truth. So like inhaling, Lord, help me, exhaling, believe truth. You know, what is the truth here? Lord, you know their heart. You know my heart. Help me to think rightly about others. And just leaning into some of these breath prayers that slow us down. And I think it's as we are slowed down that our mind, sometimes our thoughts get racing so far ahead of us and we spiral ourselves way out.
Totally.
But when we've slowed it down to go, oh, you're right. I don't know that they quote unquote hate me. Maybe they had the stomach flu.
Yeah.
Two very different things. Two very different things.
Absolutely.
But when we get our thoughts going so fast, that's what I love about breath prayers is it slows down and the Holy Spirit then can whisper, you don't know that's true. Or do you know that for sure? Or I love you. You don't need to worry about this.
Yeah.
That's great.
A thought I had, Andy, is just that we've kind of talked about this in some other episodes recently, but naming something kind of helps you move through it, understanding and acknowledging I'm going to have obstacles in this process. Kind of prepares you to know that obstacles will come. And so I think just naming, I'm human and I'm going to be awkward sometimes and I'm not going to say things the way I want sometimes, and kind of just owning it and acknowledging it normalizes it. And then I think enables you move through it. Yeah.
It's good.
I love that. And just even the idea of like, I'm human also means sometimes I do things really well.
Yes.
I think so often we associate our humanity with brokenness. And I'm like, we were human before brokenness entered the picture. And so sometimes being human means I'm going to hit it out of the ballpark. I'm going to make a presentation and it's going to really move people because I did a good job and the Holy Spirit was at work. Like I handled my part well. And so all of that, it does come back to our mindset is to be human doesn't just mean to be flawed.
Yes. Actually, that's so important.
Yeah.
And I wish you would have maybe asked this question at the beginning of the episode, because I fear that somebody might even see the title and say, I don't want to honor my humanity. My humanity is sinful.
Yeah. Well, it is, but it's also not sinful and it's really fun and it likes to eat French fries. So all of that is the good part of being human too.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because in the faculties that God has given us, we bear his image. Humanity bears his image, his creativity, the capacity for love, for like choice. Yeah, choice and agency to love, to sacrifice. Yeah.
It's good.
All of that. Yeah. I wish we'd said that earlier. Oh, well.
Okay. Well, this has been a fabulous conversation. I really, really fun from my perspective.
Absolutely.
So by way of encouragement, what else would you want to say to our listeners as they persevere in support-based ministry?
One of my favorite reminders to myself is we're in a marathon, not a sprint. And God is for us for the long haul. I think sometimes there can be such urgency in ministry, like everything's got to work out this month, or I've got to know exactly what my next step is this month, or I have to get all of this done. And working with hundreds, thousands of people now for decades, life is long and God is gracious. And that would just sort of be my hope. We are faithful with what we've been entrusted, but we're not a slave to it. And there's just, I think, a different flavor between faithfulness versus slavery to like, God has called me, I have to do all of this. And just, it's, whether you're on full-time support for 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, God is going to be walking with you all of that time and beyond. And just the idea that God, it's a marathon. We're in this for the long haul to enjoy it.
That's great. And also something I picked up, it seems like we really need to intentionally make decisions that lead us into community and out of isolation.
Absolutely.
It seems critical.
Yeah. which is also very core to humanity.
Mhm.
We were made to be with people.
That's right. Great. Well, any other resources that you would recommend as we wrap up?
Mostly, I'd recommend people just visit Global Trellis. We've got a lot of resources there for
Yes.
people.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
And then we'll link your author page from Amazon. Is that the best way to kind of see all the stuff that you've put out
To
there?
find all the books, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. And truly, last question. You have $10,000 that you're given today.
It's
You have
hypothetical.
5 seconds to decide what to do with it. Who and what do you give it to?
I have a friend, because I've heard you ask this question to others. So I have actually, every time I hypothetically think about this, she came from a really challenging background and requires almost weekly therapy.
Hmm.
And it gets very expensive.
Yes, it does.
And if I could just give her $10,000 to relieve that burden and just let her know what you're doing is honorable. Like, you are not broken because you need therapy this often. I would give her the $10,000.
Awesome.
I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for your time.
So good to see you again, Amy.
Thank you. I have so enjoyed this. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, listeners.
It's Not About the Money is presented by Provisio Fundraising Solutions. Provisio equips support-based workers with flexible training, practical resources, and one-on-one coaching. Find out more at provisiofundraising.com.